Welcome you all. Is this the third one, Joel, or is this the fourth? How far along are we? Number three?
Number three, yeah.
Number three. So we are at the residential truck traffic work group number three. Before we get started, I want to remind everybody that the work group is being recorded. This session is being recorded today, so I want to remind everybody of that. And then I want to try to do a quick attendance checklist to make sure that we have all our members. I was trying to read down the line, but I just figure I'll do a little checklist. Major Landsman, you with us? Okay, I thought I saw him on here, but maybe not. Crystal, I know that you're here. Pete, did Pete join us yet?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, hey, Pete, how are you this morning?
Good. How are you?
Good.
I should say
Matt,
present.
present. Matt, are you with us? Yep, I see Matt on there. Mr. Farley. Not yet. Mr. Champion?
I am Deandra. Sorry, my camera does not seem to be working this morning, so it's audio only, it looks like.
No problem. John Merson.
That's me.
Hi, sir. Good to see you this morning.
How are you?
Good. And then Ron.
I'm here.
Okay. I think we have everybody but Major and Jeff, correct?
This is Captain Brown. Sorry, I had another call. I'm here for the major.
Oh, okay. Thanks for joining us, Captain. And then Lewis, do you know if Jeff's going to join us today?
I don't know for certain. I actually emailed him yesterday afternoon, and I did not hear back from him. So.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll try to catch him up as we move along. But we'll go ahead on and get started. We have a full agenda today. It's taking us right up until the 12 o'clock hour. So we'll get started. So I want to thank you all again for being a part of this work group. I want to also remind you all of some of the deliverables that we have that are due in March. Most of you all received, well, not most of you all received the email from Joel early in November 20th about some ideas about what we were trying to do at this work group meeting number 3. But just to get us started and reminded of some of our charge, I wanted to talk about our deliverables for March in particular. And that's what this meeting will be focused on, to try to get some of those deliverables in place so that we're prepared for March. So the route review and map creation, a reminder that we need to comprehensively review the existing truck routes, which we've done that as we led into this. Identify the main areas of concern in their relation to the existing truck routes. We did that, I believe, in the second meeting as well. And identify the type of streets that should be considered as primary routes, local trucking routes, and restricted routes. We're going to have some conversation about that today. Create a map that can be used by vehicle operators in real time. We have some presentations to help us with a little bit of pulling that together. Develop a plan to evaluate existing signage and make necessary adjustments. We'll have some discussion around that and recommend certain types of vehicles that should be exempt from enforcement by a vehicle height monitoring system. Those are the things that primarily we want to work on between this meeting and the next meeting so that we can meet our deliverables for March. After that, we'll go on and talk about some of our deliverables that will be due in August. So, sorry. So with that, we'll go right into the agenda. And the first item on the agenda that we would like to discuss is the map development process. So Joel, should I turn it over to you on the map development process, or you want me to open it up?
I can just say a few things. I think
Okay.
we have, looked at how Baltimore City has done it. I have that map ready, available to pull it up. As really the only comparable jurisdiction that has done this type of thing in the state. I think it's an example to look at, but we really need to make our own decision now at this point on what do we want our map to look like. We may need to make some decisions related to that on, do we want to sort of grade things as they had? And there's 3 gradings. I'll pull that up in terms of, through routes and main trucking routes and areas where they shouldn't be at all. And just really get our system in place, because I think that there's a step 1 and a step 2, and a step 2 is the breakdown of where we think these gradings or classifications should go, where the trucks shouldn't go. But before we do that, we really need to set up what is our system. So I think that's where we need to start.
So we're starting with what is our system, and we looked at what Baltimore City did. We also had some conversation with our GIS and GPS folks about what we could possibly do. So we'll do the reminder about what Baltimore City's map looked like. Right, Joel? I'm gonna bring that up.
Yes, give me 1 second. Sorry.
It's okay.
Okay. Is that up on screen now?
Mm-hmm.
So the way the Baltimore City classified it, which is you can see here, these red routes, these interstate and the through routes were those main streets that were determined to be areas, the main streets the trucks should be. It's appropriate that those roads have commercial trucking on them. The local routes are in blue, where trucks can get off of those main routes if they have a delivery in the area. And then this green route here and here are sort of special cases where they operate as local routes at a certain time of day and then are restricted at other times of day. So that is how the city has done theirs for reference.
Joel, can you go down a little bit? They had the blue for local and green for certain restricted routes. And then of course the interstate, which I should also mention, if we start to put some routes together that of course I'm sure are gonna connect with the interstate, we'll need to bring SHA into the conversation as well. So as we move throughout this process, we should think about that and make note that if we're going to make those type of recommendations, we should, as a committee, bring them in to get their feedback, so that we know that it's a recommendation that could be feasible if we make it to the next level for our March report.
So this is Lewis. I'm just going to jump in for a second if I could. So on the interstate system, they're obligated to allow trucks, right? They don't have a choice but for allowance. But I would just really encourage us to consider using a similar color scheme and identification process, since your roads intersect with Baltimore City. That way, in reality, a map could be created potentially. Like Baltimore City does have theirs as a GIS, even though it's not readily available on the GPS systems. They got it in a GIS format probably 2 years ago, I would say, which makes it a lot more user friendly from the standpoint, at least here when I'm sitting at a desk. If somebody calls me about a particular route, I punch it in on the GIS and see how it's color coded. I could show that real quickly if that might make things a little bit easier, but just synchronization, I think, is really important as part of this project, because we don't want to see routes that are clearly acceptable in the county or the city and then hit a dead space when you enter the other jurisdiction if that's a connected route. So, and color coding would seem to be an important synchronization for ease of understanding, because you could potentially put that GIS up and show both Baltimore County and Baltimore City then, and make it, much simpler for drivers who are traveling through both jurisdictions.
That's a good recommendation. I mean, for ease of the truckers to know. I mean, because you'll cross from Baltimore County to Baltimore City in some situations, I'm sure. So for ease of understanding.
Yeah,
it
and
makes
then back
sense
into the
to color
county
code.
potentially, right?
Right.
At some other location. So, yeah.
So Louis, you offered to pull it up on GIS, did you?
I can. I mean, I keep it saved as a bookmark. I can just show it real quickly if people want it. I can just share a screen real quickly and give you a sense of it. So, for example, let me just do a screen share. Oh, actually, I think you have to allow me to share content, Joel, because I don't have that as an option right now.
Let me get that for you here.
There we go. Okay, so, oh no, it's not. Actually, it's just asking me if I want to share content. Hold on here. Okay, here we go. So it should pop up in a second. You can tell me if you can see it.
Yep, it's up.
Yep. So, a paper map is great, but also because of the size of the jurisdictions and the amount of roads, it is very difficult to manage. In this scenario here, right, let's just say, I can zoom in anywhere and see if it's a route or not, as you see by my example right there, and determine exactly where it starts and stops, for example. Or, let's just take Browning Highway as an example. I mean, I know Browning Highway, is right there along the port, so I know it's a truck route. But for example, if I didn't know, and I've had circumstances where people have asked me about a particular route, right now I can zoom right in and see Browning Highway exactly. And up above, I know I'm jumping around right now, so I apologize for sort of how rapidly Browning Highway changes, right? So I can pinpoint at Holabird Avenue. So I can pinpoint exactly where that change is very easily. So that's just something to keep in mind, and ends as it gets into a more residential area, up here. So anyway, just as an example of the possibility for synchronization, I think is really important here, since there's so much connectivity between the city and county roadways. So with that, I'll just close that out and just kind of get off of my.
So this is Doug, and I hope it's okay for me to interject at these times.
Yes, Doug, let me introduce you all. Doug is our GIS director for DPW. We've invited Doug as well as, I think, Rob, to do some presentations later, but Doug, please feel free.
Okay, thank you. This might be something where instead of folks needing to use two different applications, one for the county, one for the city, and I'm assuming some of the other surrounding jurisdictions are going to need to do this, where we go to the Regional Council of Governments and ask them to stand up an application that contains all of that data. They do a lot of this type of stuff from a GIS perspective already for us in this region. And there, in theory, would be no reason why we couldn't ask them to do that as well. That way, instead of a logistics company needing to, or a trucking company needing to go out and look, they don't have to look at a city application and then a county application and another county application. They could just go and go to one location for that. So.
Yeah, I think that would be fantastic to be able to do something like that. And I'll take it a step further even. What is missing from the configuration of the city's GIS piece is that if I was trying to map my route, it doesn't allow me to put in, a start and an end location, and then I can see whether or not the options that come up are legal for me or not. And I know that, a lot of local drivers, they're going to know, right? I get that they're going to know, or they should know, or they're going to find out really quickly if they're getting a camera citation. But for drivers who aren't here every day or run inconsistent routes, then it might provide, a viable mapping tool for them, which would be really meaningful.
So Baltimore City's map doesn't currently allow you to put in a start and an end location, but that will be a recommendation that you're having for what we put together for Baltimore County.
Yes, I can punch in an address in the city, right, which is what I was doing with Browning Highway. I might have got muted there while I was showing that, so I'm sorry if I did. I wasn't sure if you guys could hear me the entire time, but I can punch in an address, and then it'll zoom in on that address so I can see, is it a valid truck route or how is it coded? But it doesn't allow me to put in 2 points, so I can't put and actually map it out for me, right? So I don't know if that's an opportunity for us.
And that might be where, this is Doug again, that might be where we want to collaborate with the state on this, because they already have an application that allows you to do routing through the Maryland landscape. And so if we provided our data to them and they were able to integrate it into their system, it already has that functionality. Instead of every jurisdiction trying to do their own thing, you could be collaborative about this.
Doug, that's a great point. Even I think also they use that for oversize overweight permitting, right? Because they identify the routes that you are allowed to take for over-dimensional types of loads that require an exceptional hauling permit.
That's quite true. Thanks.
And this is Rob. I can work through the Maryland Geographic Information Committee. We do a One Maryland, One Centerline project. We update our road center lines with them quarterly. So if we can get these attributes on the center lines, they'll then be available at the state level automatically.
So that sounds like a major kudos that we would be able to do something like that, or the possibility of something like that would be available. But before we get to that point of having the possibility of something like that available, I really want to ask the task force, are we all in agreement that this is how we want to go in terms of the color coding of the map, because it's the map development process? So do we have any other ideas about the map for Baltimore County and how it should look that we wanted to put on the table? Because I feel like we moved to the next point of collaboration, but I want to make sure we all agree about how we would like for the map to look.
The one comment I would have about the city map is that I'm not sure that their color scheme meets all of the ADA requirements. When we would make a map for publication like that, we run it through a tool called Color Oracle that evaluates for the different, especially color blindness and the ability to look at data through different mediums. And so I have not done that because I don't know what their color values are. So I think anything that we produce as Baltimore County independently needs to be looked at from ADA compliance.
Which may affect the color scheme.
Correct.
If it comes out that the colors need to be modified for that purpose, and I can certainly respect that that might be the case, then I think it would behoove us to go back to the city and encourage them then to make that modification to, synchronize with what the county does. And we'd have a really good justification for doing that if it's based on, an ADA compliance issue.
Okay. So I want to open it up to the task force to open it up for discussion about the recommendation that's on the table in terms of what we would like to recommend that the map looks like. So I want to open it for discussion. Anybody?
Well, me being John Merson, I've driven commercial vehicles for about 40 years. And I would say that definitely you'd have to have the city and the county on the same page, because from a trucker point of view, you'd want to be able to watch the complete map and not just the city map or the county map back and forth. Definitely it's going to have to be ADA compliant, which is a federal mandate. So the city wouldn't have any problem going to ADA compliance because they'd have to. I would think that definitely with truckers, a lot of times go through the city and the county back and forth all day long. They need to have the color coding done correctly and equally so that you could drive back and forth on your GPS. That's it.
Okay. Anybody else want to provide feedback?
I was wondering if we could ask Louis, given his involvement in the initial city process, to talk about. I think some of the red routes is kind of obvious why they were there, but how some of the decision making came around these local routes in terms of because this would be a real flip from us, where we just have particular restricted routes that we say in Baltimore County you can't be here, to a system where we're saying here is where it's appropriate to be. That's a fairly big system change, and I wanted to know what the local truck route decision making looked like, if you'll do this.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and it was a cumbersome effort. Let me say, we had several meetings. We divided the city up into 4 quadrants. Certain quadrants, were obviously more of a challenge, but what we really did is hone in on where are the major routes that trucks are frequenting that are legal, right? Where are the major industrial centers and the like, where we have to make sure that we have continued access and adequate access to get in and out of there. And then what were the residential areas where they were experiencing a lot of cut-through challenges and the like, and were there any reasons, I will say, why those cut-through challenges were legitimate or not, right? And that's how we really came up. Certainly, there were some routes on here that everyone was in agreement on, and there were some routes where there was a desire for us to have available, but we don't have available, and there were some routes where some residential areas wanted to make sure trucks were not available, but we had to have them because they were the only sort of viable, north-south alternative, for example, in some areas. Like, for example, Ponca Street is a great example of one of the areas that they retained and things of that sort. So that's how the conversation stemmed. I will say we were fortunate because the people at the city who were participating had a really good grasp of the major industrial areas within the city and where there were large volumes of truck traffic. I don't have that in every single jurisdiction in the state, and so I would, have to defer a bit to what you guys understand. I have a list of Baltimore County's, major industrial parks and things of that sort. But, I've got to defer a little bit to you guys as well about some of that. But that's how those conversations took place. Where were the problem areas? Where were the dedicated access that were unquestionable that we had to have? And then where were, some of the gray areas? And we talked through each of those. And what alternates existed.
So it sounds like before we could make recommendations on what the local routes should look like, we may need a little bit more information about what the truck routes actually are, maybe? Does that sound
Yeah,
appropriate?
Joel pointed out a really important flip that did occur with this whole process in the city, which was the designation changed from being told, that these are the routes you can't go on to these are the routes that you can go on. And visually, I think it's a lot easier if you look at the map, right? Because there are obviously a lot more routes that are not available to us. Everything in gray is essentially a restricted route, right? Unless you're making a local delivery. And this way, a driver could easily identify, okay, I'm trying to get to this area of the city, and so I would travel along these colored routes until I get to the nearest intersection where I have to come off to make that pickup or delivery. In which case, then, the gray routes then become legal as long as I've traveled up to the nearest access point along those available routes.
So that's a major change in process. That's a major change in process that I think that it deserves a lot more conversation about how we would like to recommend to move forward and the impact of that change. So are we saying that that's the best recommended process that we should follow when creating the map, is to change how we look at it altogether? You can, as opposed to not being able to go through here, these are the routes you can go. If that is the process that we're recommending in order to be able to build a map, I think we got to get a little bit more input from maybe the truck traffic engineering in DPW, so that we can see what the impact of that flip would be in order to be able to create a map like this. I mean, that's just my feedback. What do you all think?
So I don't want to dominate the conversation, but I would say that I do think that Baltimore City took the appropriate concept, because if you took this map of theirs, let's just say, and you flipped it, and we color-coded all of the routes that were illegal, you would be overwhelmed with color on that, right? And then you're basically saying, oh, so I have to find a gray route, or a non-colored route to actually figure out where I'm supposed to be. This is pretty easy for me to look at and say, okay, these are the routes I'm legally allowed, because they're all, very prominent routes, either interstate highways, or you've got Route 1 in there, for example, major activity. And so from a visual standpoint, this is certainly, I think, easier than a map that would designate all the roads that I am not legally allowed to be. That's just my own opinion.
If I can jump in again, I think that Andrew brings up a good point about sort of the comprehensiveness of this. We have started this looking at the areas where communities reached out to the county the most with concerns about truck traffic, which are the southwest and southeast location. But I think we wouldn't be able to implement this only in those areas and then leave the other 5/7 of the county. In the old way, we would have to do the whole county, which is a pretty enormous undertaking because of its geographic size. And I think that we'll, have to decide if we want this work group to actually be drawing that map out, or if this is a, here is our framework idea, and when, we're sort of at the end of our process, we turn it over to those DPW engineers to work with the community and folks like Lewis. But what our own scope is really going to be important if we're talking about something that comprehensive.
So if we go back to the deliverables, it said to comprehensively review the existing truck routes. But what we reviewed were the areas of concern. So should our focus be on actual routes as opposed to the areas of concern, and then put the areas of concern on top of that, and then do a suggestion on a new route for those areas of concern?
That would make sense to me, because I think the areas of concern, you're talking about potential camera locations, and then the map is more for, where those routes are, where they're supposed to be. So that makes sense to me. And I think maybe one thing that we should work through, Lewis, with you and Jeff ahead of the next meeting is having something to present on where those routes actually are. And it sounds like you already have a list of at least some locations that I'd love to look at and talk to you about. But yeah, yes, I agree with you, Deandra.
So that'll be one to do that we'll have on the next one, present the actual routes, the actual truck routes, and then maybe lay on top of it the areas of concern. That may give us a better idea to be able to identify those streets that should be considered as routes and local trucking routes and restricted routes. I think that'll help us better. It would help me better to make recommendations associated with those three things. If we actually, because we really didn't look at routes. I know we looked at areas of concern, but we didn't map out what the routes actually look like, the truck routes in Baltimore County actually look like.
And I think, it's Lewis again. I think one of the challenges is I don't know, do you guys actually have designated truck routes as in your code, for example? I don't know if you do or not, in the same way that the city does. So certainly I think it makes a lot of sense, because we understand where there are areas of concern that are, I think, primed for camera enforcement, to understand what the legal routes should be to access the, key areas. I know John has had, a tremendous challenge right there in is that technically Arbutus, John? Or?
Yes, it's Halethorpe, actually.
Thank you. Yeah. So and in the Halethorpe area, and so understanding and seeing the correct route that we want to encourage drivers to be using, overlaid with the problem areas, I think would be very valuable in terms of trying to identify, how the recommendations we might make for routing, and if we can somehow synchronize those up with, if it connects to the city, I think that's an important piece too.
Okay, so I think I have someone who may be able to answer that question. Mike Philslinger, are you on the call? I think I see your name.
I'm here.
Hey.
As far as actually having designated sites or Truck routes, we do not have those. We just have the no through truck restrictions in certain areas. I think that answers the question.
Mhm. It does.
Okay.
So I think what we're basically looking at is that every route is illegal under today's standard. Every route is a legal route unless there is a prohibition with a signed restriction. Then it sounds like. Okay.
Correct.
Which in a
see.
way does not seem to make it hard to recommend some routes because we're starting from scratch, in my opinion. But that may be difficult. I don't know. What do you all think?
Now, see, in my opinion, I think that two things. Number one, if you try to map out the whole county as a major undertaking, I think if you just address the areas that you were problem areas that you were considering originally for cameras would be a better start versus trying to do the whole county and then come up with something. Second of all, if in order to block or restrict a route, you have to give the driver an alternate route, a legal route. And so by doing that, it's just like a diet. You don't want to tell people what not to eat. You want to tell them what to eat. So you want to tell your truck driver where he can go legally so he doesn't have to find it on his own and go through an illegal route. My opinion.
And I think John makes a really good point, a couple of good points in a way that we can maybe slice this a little bit differently to prevent this from turning into kind of an extraordinary work effort, at least initially, in that if we actually looked at those problem areas, right, and you did develop the map that still told people where they definitely can be. In this scenario, what I would maybe envision is it doesn't necessarily mean that if the street on the map is not coded as a designated route, that it's illegal. It would still be illegal based on signage, like, for example, the problem that John's having, right, in Halethorpe, right? So that'd still be an illegal route. That's on Benson, correct, John?
Yeah, correct.
So Benson, you could create a map that would just identify what the appropriate through routes would be in that area, right, that would keep them off of Benson. Benson still stays signed as illegal. It could still be identified as a camera location with enforcement based on, automated enforcement because there's signage indicating it as illegal. And you've given drivers the alternative routes. The difference between your map then and the city's map is that the city's map, every single route is illegal if it's not color coded. That doesn't have to be the case with your map, right? It could just be, these are the routes that we want to encourage you to use, and you must obey signage, right, if you deviate from these routes to determine whether or not you are legally allowed on a road. And then you don't have to do, every single road in the city. in the county, perhaps.
Okay, so seems like we would have to reevaluate because the charges identify the areas of concern and their relation to existing truck routes. Okay, so we don't have existing truck routes. So we would have to make recommendations on those existing truck routes. I believe that's based on the areas of concern that we've identified. We've talked about Baltimore City and what Baltimore City did in terms of their map and what it looks like. It may be beneficial for us to, if you all don't mind, let Doug and Rob do their presentations on what we actually have available for the maps so that we could have a flip side of what we could possibly offer up. we've heard about Baltimore City, but this could be an idea of another option that we can offer that may be helpful in another terms for the truck drivers when they're trying to figure out where they should and should not be. So Doug, would you like to do your presentation?
Certainly. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All I'm getting is share content, and it's asking me to share a file or a whiteboard. Joel, is there a way for me to share my screen? Okay. Got it. Yep. Are you seeing a map now?
Not yet.
How about now?
It's up. Yep.
Okay, good. So based on a request from DeAndrea, my group was tasked with mapping all the roads that have truck restrictions on them currently. And so what you're seeing here, if I turn off the full county street center lines, this is county GIS data. You've got, of course, an imagery-based map, county boundary, stuff like that. So all these blue lines with the orange halo on them are roads that are currently have truck restrictions on them.
Oh, actually, we don't see the map. We just see some verbiage.
Oh, okay. Maybe I shared the wrong screen.
I think we're looking at your OneNote right now.
Yeah, okay, thanks. I will fix that here in a second. If I can. Okay, the easiest thing for me to do is just drag this over there. How's that? Now you see a map, or you should. And the OneNote should be gone. So I just wanted to, part of what I was trying to do today is, we did what DeAndrea asked, which was to map roads that are truck restricted. And in that database, we identified the roads that based on time of day. So we extracted some information out of the traffic regulations that identified whether there was a time restriction on the roads. So the purple roads are none. There's a couple of roads throughout the county, and I can zoom in on this area over here in, kind of outside the Towson area, where you can see there are some roads that have time of day constraints on them. In addition to pulling out time of day restrictions, we also pulled out whether or not there were what the regulation said. So was it a 3/4 ton truck or bigger? Was there a bridge weight limit? And was it a, specific to a tractor trailer? So you can see down in this area, there's one little piece of road that you're not supposed to drive tractor trailers on. And then we also at requested, and I got to go to a bookmark now, we also mapped roads that had complaints on them. So from the perspective of building a map set like this, it was pretty straightforward to go in and harvest the regulations and scrub them down and figure out where roads were at with truck restrictions. But in theory, as you all as a work group are working to try to identify, one, not only where where you want the truck routes and things of that nature to be, there's a lot of other information in GIS that might help tell this story. So one of the things I went and did was just went in and reclassified the county's zoning data to identify where the businesses, residential, manufacturing, office, and then resource conservation are. So like this area here in purple, all of this area here is where a lot of our businesses are that are going to generate truck iterations. In fact, one of the data sets that we've got access to is this Info Group USA. It's a data set. It's a commercially available data set that gives us information. So what I did was I went in there and using the North American Industry Classification Code, I went in and extracted all of the businesses that have the manufacturing moniker in there. And so all these little red triangles, let me zoom in a little closer, just say on this area here so you can get a feel, all of these businesses are listed as being in support of some type of manufacturing. So manufacturing to me equals trucks. Now you got to realize I'm a GIS guy, so I might be able to have a little simplistic view about this. So on top of that, then I went in and extracted once again companies that had a transportation and warehousing NAICS code, and you can see the distribution of these in the landscape. So as y'all are doing your analysis for trying to determine the wheres, we have access to all this kind of information. And then another thing that's out here is we have bridge data in the county that allows us to determine any of these red squares. So these red squares here are an indication of where there are bridges in the county that are posted for weight. And so all of this information can be synthesized together and analyzed to, try to make some of these determinations. So as you go down into a community, I'm going to go back over this way, as we're trying to get folks out of this area or out of this area down here, shutting down some of these roads might be difficult for them. That's what we've done from a GIS perspective. Is the main thing we've done as requested was to map all of the routes that are currently restricted. And then I just also wanted to show some of the GIS data that is available to us from an analytical standpoint so that we can do that. I think Rob also wanted to talk about a little bit about how we can share. So this data here, this truck restriction data is ready to rock and roll. We can now put this on the county's open data site. So I'd like to turn it over to Rob unless there's questions for me. Hearing none, Joel, if you could pass it over to Rob Livermore so he can show the open data portal.
I think you might have to stop sharing.
Okay. Done.
I don't have privileges to share yet. All right, there we go. Can everybody see my screen now?
Yes.
All right, so just want to go over some of the briefly go over some of the capabilities we have here in GIS in Baltimore County. Off our main county website, we have our GIS open data portal where we can come in and explore various data sets, and then they are publicly available to anybody in the world that comes to this website. We also have some other applications and things that are pertinent to our community, neighborhoods, and transportation. Here in the open data portal, we can search by various themes. We can look at roads, we can look at other type of data here. If we select roads, this will bring us into our open data portal. It'll show us the data sets we have related to roads, and then give us a little bit of metadata about what they are, what they contain. When we click on the data set, that actually takes us in to the data set, gives us a brief overview, allows us to see the attributes that are associated with it, any other related data sets that people may be interested in. We can click on the data tab and get an actual record set of what is in the data. We can actually do some filtering and work in there to look for attributes that we might like. For those that do application work, we can click on the API Explorer, and that allows applications to interface in and actually query out the data and do it programmatically. It gives us a URL that the applications can use. And then from there, users can also come in and download the data currently in 3 formats: spreadsheets for Excel, KML, which is for Google, that goes right into Google Maps, Waze, etc., and then shapefiles, a standard open data GIS format. So we have those options there. can also be presented in the form of an application like Baltimore County's My Neighborhood, where we could bring in ancillary information along with the roads, and users could query and look around for different information. We can put in different layers that people might be interested in, which we can dynamically turn on and off. And what we can also do in this tool is print to various different formats, large and small scale maps, and brought up a couple examples of what they look like. Once they're printed out, you can do that similar map that the city has. So our capabilities here are that we link the data. I think it's important to note that in our open data portal, when we make the data available here, it links back to our enterprise databases. So every night, the databases are refreshed automatically. So as DPW makes edits to the data, the information is automatically available the next day. So I think that covers about what I have to go over. Does anybody have any questions?
So Rob, I just
Yeah.
want to, for the committee, I'm
Yep.
sorry, somebody had a question. For the committee, there was a question that came up during the last meeting that we had about
Yep.
the information not being updated to Waze and other mapping sources so
Right.
that it was easily accessible by the truckers. Can you talk a little bit about if we create a map here, how easy that process would be for us to do in this case for the committee?
Right. So once the data is here and it's in this format, Baltimore County, and thanks for reminding me about the Waze. We have an agreement with Waze. We're part of their Connected Citizens program. So one of the things that we're trying to get set up is if we share our road data with Waze, which I believe they already get from our open data portal through their partnership with Esri. But what we would do is share our data with Waze, our road data, transportation, highways, the police department, the fire department will actually have a portal into Waze where they will be able to dynamically update the road information, most specifically around road closure. So if there's a special event coming, say the Towson 4th of July parade, the DPW can go in and close that road segment ahead of time. That updates the routing algorithms in Waze and allows, people traveling to avoid the area. The police department would also have the ability to close areas in case of a major event, same with the fire department. But in terms of getting the data up, really, we get the data up here, we would just want to notify like the major routing companies that this data is publicly available here and it's updated on such and such a frequency, which we typically keep inside of our metadata for the layer. Does that answer your question?
It answers mine, Louis. I think the question came a little bit as a con from, something that we wanted to kind of avoid in Baltimore City.
Yeah.
Does that help to give us some background about what we could possibly put into play here as it relates to our maps?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really encouraged by both of these presentations. So on the mapping piece, then it seems like that potentially, because you only have restricted routes right now, that's still really valuable, right? That the potential would exist to upload that information into Waze and Google Maps in such a way that it would identify if a route is restricted for truck traffic, which is really what you're trying to do, right? Is you're trying to tell these guys you cannot travel on this particular road. And then I guess a question I had is about the ability to sync this between the two of you, right? Because this was fascinating, one, to see both of these I love the color coding, drilling down to, warehousing and manufacturing and the like that Doug shared, because potentially understanding that you don't want to do necessarily an analysis of every roadway in your county, you could really, I think, quickly identify key routes in the county for truck travel, right? And even just looking at the one that you were drilling down to, Doug, right? You could see where there was a restriction on some of those roads nearby, but you could see what clearly are what I'll call primary roads that had no restriction and could be, I think, pretty quickly identified as, routes that trucks ought to be on. Understanding that you don't want to necessarily have go through a road by road, we could at least hit those primary roads very easily. And then you sort of defer to signage when you deviate from that route, which ties back, to problems like what Halethorpe has and what Dundalk has and things like that. We know the primary routes in the Dundalk area, right? And so I really like what you guys are able to do. So is that information, does that sync together in some way?
This is Doug. The truck restriction data is brand spanking new from a GIS perspective. Once we get that moved up into our what we call our production database, then we get OIT and Rob's group to move it over to the county's production database, and then we simply tell them that it's okay for this data to be shared publicly. And then that's when it makes it to things like the open data portal. It makes it available to bring into the My Neighborhood application and the like. But right now, everybody in DPW that is a GIS user, in theory, has access to this data.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
But
And-
we will work with Doug to see if we could, because that's information that's already out there, get it out to the public space outside of DPW. Doug just has to tell me the process for us to do that. And that's something that can happen without this committee moving forward on anything, just to make it available and easier for the truckers to have, to know where they shouldn't go already.
Right. And I think one of the other things we could do is look at creating a customized, more specific My Neighborhood type of app that is specifically geared towards transportation and trucking, where it would have our major roads and our restriction on it and any other information. And these are all web-based, mobile-based applications, so they actually just become available on anyone's phone or tablet or whatever device they're using.
So Rob, with that
Mhm.
being said, Louis, that's
Mhm.
why I wanted to show, what we kind of have available to us in Baltimore County, so that you can see the difference between what we have available versus what Baltimore City did, to try to get us as a task force to say, what route do we want to go? I still think that the color coding for Baltimore City is good, but I think we are really able to do some static type stuff with the GIS information that we have available now. And I think it makes it easier for us to be able to make a recommendation on.
I think it's very encouraging. Absolutely.
Good. So if I go back to, and Rob and Doug, I really do appreciate it. Thank you so much. You all did a great job transferring that information to the committee. I really do appreciate it. Don't go anywhere, because I'm sure I got more for you all to do, but hold on just tight. But if I always want to go back to the chart, so we know that we have the restricted routes done. The other part of what we have to do is the primary routes, discussion about the primary and the local trucking routes. Looks like it'll be a little bit easier to do that. I think that we've had quite a bit of discussion. We're at the 11 o'clock hour on the map creation. I would like to recommend that Joel and I go back after this meeting, figure out what we should offer up so that we can have discussion around the primary route recommendations and the local trucking route recommendations to go on top of the restricted routes so that we can be in a position to make a recommendation on the map. So I would like to put that forth to everybody to see if you all have any discussions or comments about that.
I would like to comment. I just got yanked into another meeting, but thank you for including me. I have to go do something related to the BCPS incident last week.
Okay.
So thank you very much, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Yep.
Hello, this is Captain Brown. I do think that including us in the city routes in the same colors is a huge issue, and it definitely is a plus if we do that, because a lot of these things are county, city, across the lines. I mean, we see it other areas in the Wilkins area, as well as clearly Dundalk is in and out of the city. So I think that's definitely a plus. And I also have talked to my commercial vehicle folks about the issue of we're not designated routes to go. We're just designated routes that they're not permitted to go. So I do think, you know, for instance, when we have, you know, vehicles going up certain areas in Dundalk, providing some type of feedback to them that they can immediately, you know, whether it's referred to in a GIS or signage that says this is where you should be going, it would be definitely a plus. And I think regardless of whether these are designated zones for this future these camera system, I think there's areas in the county that are problems, whether they be minor, because clearly the big problem is what's going on at Dundalk, but all these areas we could then tackle. I mean, there's one issue in on Patterson Avenue and on Liberty Road off Liberty, where vehicles are coming off the Beltway, turning left on Patterson to get to, I believe, the Pimlico area, that clearly a cut through to a residential area. It's not a huge complaint, but letting the trucks know this is the way you're supposed to go down to Northern Parkway, things like that. So there's other areas in the county where we could be effective in designating the routes, even if they're not necessarily under discussion for this new legislation. I think that would definitely be a plus. And whatever you need as far as help to designate those roads, we could be of assistance as well. So I appreciate that.
Thank you.
I would say this is Lewis again. I really like what you've suggested, DeAndrea, about essentially doing that overlay and being able to look at that comparatively with restricted areas, and then with using the GIS data that was just shared, you know, where the primary, you know, access points need to be.
Okay. All right. So it looks like we're making some great progress. It looks like we have a option in play for a route map. So that's good, and we'll come back and we'll talk about the primary recommendations and local recommendations. And so that covers the number 2, 3, and 4 on our agenda. I wanted to also give us an opportunity to bounce around what we would think about vehicle exemptions as a part of the discussion item as well, so that we'll have both of these moving forward to meet our deliverables in December. So, Joel, you want to open up the vehicle exemption discussion?
Sure. Sorry if there's some background noise. There is some drilling going on in the floor below us here. I think coming into this discussion with a little less in hand in terms of background research, and I was actually wondering if Lewis wouldn't mind starting us out, because I think we want to know what the industry thinks about, you know, vehicles that should receive an exemption, and how that would look, and then sort of bounce that back against what makes sense for the county, what makes sense for the community. So, Lewis, sorry to keep keep putting you on the spot, but if you don't mind, we'd
No,
love to
no.
hear your thoughts.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, one of the conversations that we had during the legislative process and the concerns are that, there are certain types of vehicles that are frequently in neighborhoods. And I think we, know predominantly what those types are, right? It's package delivery trucks, it's trash trucks, it's home heating fuel type deliveries, household goods movers, for example, and, that have typically legitimate needs to be in those communities. I am not trying to create a scenario where you see a bunch of FedEx or UPS trucks driving through somebody's neighborhood when they clearly don't have a delivery in that neighborhood. But I think what our hope was is that there would be some type of clearance where a company that frequents county residential areas could apply for an exemption, essentially that it would then not be getting camera citations issued, unless, of course, they have a scenario where, like John has shared with me, that, he has a number of UPS vehicles that are clearly cutting through. Right. And we've done some outreach to UPS as a result of that. I'm trying to avoid a scenario where UPS now suddenly becomes handcuffed by all of their trucks that are legitimately in neighborhoods. But then if you start to have a scenario where, he's seeing a line of UPS vehicles that are clearly going to really just down, I think they're trying to hit 695 and 95 and using that as a cut through. That's not what I mean for an exemption, that type of behavior. But I also want to protect the hundreds of UPS trucks that are regularly in neighborhoods every day from then having to prove every time that they were legally allowed in that neighborhood. And so that's conceptually what we had in mind when we had our conversations with the county during the legislative process.
So, Louis, we're not talking about changing the weight of the vehicles that would be exempt. We're talking about the height and the type of vehicles.
Yeah. So, remember that even though this legislation was called like the vehicle height monitoring systems, it doesn't really have anything to do with vehicle height. It's just the height sensor is how you determine that you actually have a truck on that route, right? And so I know that throws people sometimes. And so, we're really talking, I think, more here, right, about vehicle height, and that in part, depending on how you set your height, not vehicle height, vehicle operation, excuse me. And in part, some of that can be excluded by how you set that height monitoring system. So I know, Joel, did you get the actual height of Baltimore City's? I thought it was set at 12 feet, but I'm not 100% on that. I know you mentioned that, for example, they set it just above the MTA bus height because they didn't want MTA buses to be triggering cameras all the time. And so I'm not sure if you had the actual height or not.
No, that was sort of a point in my initial conversation with my contact in the city that I took the note down about the MTA bus thing, but it didn't write the number down. So I'm waiting to hear back from her on what that actually is. But I was curious if you had thoughts on the effectiveness of that, if that does preclude things like trash trucks that are pretty much slam dunks on things that shouldn't be ticketed.
Yeah, so I think at a 12-foot height, you are going to exclude package delivery. For example, I have struggled, and John might actually know this because I know he runs a couple of trash trucks. I have struggled with identifying the actual height of a trash truck I've seen various dimensions and not been successful with feeling like what I've found is accurate.
So I may
Most-
be able to help. Oh, go ahead, John.
Most trash trucks are about 12 feet, 6 inches tall.
Okay.
Some are a little shorter, but most of them are on the county area are 12'6". My trash truck got caught with a warning on Benson Avenue in Baltimore City last year. They photographed my truck and said it was over height. And which we were just going to pick up one of my crew members that picked him up on Caton Avenue in Benson, but now he can't because he can't go through there. But my truck is 12'6". So UPS trucks are probably a little shorter than that. So they wouldn't be affected by that number. The problem with that is that most nights I have about 19 UPS trucks come past my house coming home. And they'd all be exempted. It wouldn't help anything at all on Benson Avenue.
And that's the challenge, right? Absolutely, because that I know is a scenario we're trying to address that would require some level of enforcement there. So,
And we only have about 50 houses on Benson Avenue in the residential area. So you're not going to get 19 delivery trucks and 50 houses.
yeah.
So you can't
So let
exempt
me,
them.
it's just so I make sure I understand, we're suggesting, we were talking about the height of the trash trucks being 12'6", and then the buses, but then if we go with that height, it won't capture the UPS trucks because they're shorter.
Right. But
Okay.
that's, UPS trucks are probably maybe 11 and a half, maybe 12 feet tall.
Yeah, that's pretty close to being right there. Actually, between 10 and 11, their most common type of package delivery
Right.
from some data that I pulled from them. The same with FedEx. They're within about 4 inches of one another. So,
Right.
yeah.
Other than the Amazon vans are a little shorter. But everything else, and so you couldn't give them an exemption because it just wouldn't work to exempt all the UPS vehicles that come past my house.
Mhm.
But it would have to be some other way to figure it out. But like I said, I've tried to give them alternative routes, but they don't want to hear about it. But you have to give a trucker an alternative route. You just can't block him out of your neighborhood. So you got to give him a better alternative route for him to take it.
So that's not something that we talked about as a part of this process. We talked about the primary and local route recommendations, which we didn't have before. So that's a plus.
Right.
So having that in place, would that help? I guess.
I think at least if you gave UPS or whoever the actual route that they could legally take to avoid getting a ticket, might be a better alternative of giving people, like I said, somewhere to legally go versus not legally go. Can't keep shutting people out.
And when I'm talking about an exemption, just as a point of clarification, I don't mean an exemption that allows them to illegally cut through, right? That's not what we're asking for, because those drivers who are coming through John's neighborhood, right, I'm sure that the vast majority of them are illegal cut-throughs, right? That's still illegal under the kind of exemption I'm talking about, which is just that they can't get a camera citation because depending on how many cameras you place and where you place them all around the county, you know, you could end up giving literally hundreds of citations to a company that, like UPS or FedEx, in, you know, just a few days because of the number of trucks they have that are legally entering those residential areas. The problem we have is John's traffic is illegal and would still be illegal, and camera enforcement helps him a lot. I understand that with that cut through type of piece.
So maybe, in terms of the discussion, maybe the vehicle exemption portion of this comes when we talk about the appeal process for the tickets, because that seems to be where we're leading in terms of the exemptions, if I'm hearing it correctly. There's some trucks that are going to go down a street, and they should be allowed to go down the street because they're going down that local street and they have to get to that location, but they may be caught with a camera. So the recommendation was that we should have an exemption process. Maybe the exemption process is on the back end of it when they have a certain amount of time to prove that they legitimately needed to be in that area.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you, DeAndrea. The problem is volume. Right, that's the problem, is just how many of those, both from a county standpoint, are you going to be issuing then? And that, again, is a function of how many cameras do you put up and where do you put them? And then also, then how many vehicles does a particular company have on the road in residential areas? So streamlining that process to make it really simple would have to be a really important component of that back end conversation if you were not going to give them an exemption on the front end.
Now, what I would say with the exemption part is that if you ticketed the trucks, every truck has a bill of lading telling them the route, the stops they had to make, and they'd have to prove that they were okay to come through there. But I think that the problem would eliminate itself after the first week because people would not want to keep defending their case. So they go another way. That would be my guess.
Yeah, John's right about the illegal ones, that would be the case, but then all the legal ones would still be getting the citations and have to keep doing it, right, if they're legitimately in neighborhoods. And that's where I'm concerned on the volume side. So
I don't know how these cameras or these are set up, but is it set up in such a way where if it was a cut through, it would be a camera on one end, on the other, and that way you would then see, okay, this particular vehicle only took 3 minutes to get through. Clearly, they were not making a local delivery. They were not picking up furniture. They were not helping someone move. Is there any component of this that this measures that? That way you would clearly see if somebody is stopped for a while there, that they would then clearly have business in that area as opposed to cutting through?
Major, we haven't gotten to the camera part and the placement of the cameras or how the cameras should be placed, but maybe that's a topic of consideration that we should discuss before we discuss the exemptions to help us with the exemption part of it. Because if the camera operation allows us to have a camera at one end and then the next, or if that's the procedure that we decide to put in place, that we're going to have a camera at this end and that end, and if it catches you on both, then it was legitimate, so we don't send you a ticket. Then you don't necessarily have to have the appeal process, could still be there, but you don't have to have the exemption process in place.
Right.
So would it be efficient to have the exemption process in place after we look at the type of monitoring systems they have out there that can help us to eliminate some of these things?
Probably. And in addition, we are going to be ones that's screening them here in my office. And right now we already screen citations for speed cameras in front of schools. For instance, there are certain things that have to be part of, when we screen them. It has to be a rear tag. It has to be over, I believe it's 12 miles per hour. There's certain vehicles, I think rental cars are exception, things like that we already kind of mesh out of the system ahead of time we can be part of some screening, but I understand there's some tough questions here that the UPS one is definitely an interesting one, especially now with everybody getting deliveries. I mean, you can see in your neighborhood, they're stopping at 3 different houses, sometimes on your street, which is telling me everybody's getting deliveries. So that's going to be a big part of what's going on with deliveries. So yeah, I agree with you. I think figuring out what is available and what, what's the most efficient for our purposes is probably maybe the first step.
Now, see, as far as I could say, when a UPS delivery truck delivers to one house, he only takes about 30 seconds. And so to measure the distance or time involved to go a half a mile and plus or minus 30 seconds is going to be a tough thing to prove.
Yeah, and there's definitely a manual component to this no matter what, right? That Jan, you guys are doing now that's going to be part of the process, I'm sure, going forward.
Okay. Yeah, we're just trying to make it as, I guess, set the stage as much as possible to leave the guesswork out of it.
But understanding and having some, I don't know if we plan to have presentations by the camera manufacturers or things like that, because we have to recommend a monitoring system. Maybe after we get those presentations and understand what the capabilities and what it can spit out based on algorithms, we may be in a better position to say what should be exempt.
Yeah, I'm absolutely open to talking about this further as we gather more information.
Can I just ask a big picture question that I think has been answered, but I just want to make sure it's clear in terms of what it means to be exempt? Does that mean that the folks responsible for the citation process within the county would have to manually take folks out based on what the rules are of who is exempt? Like there's no way to automatically exempt folks, right?
So there's not one that I'm aware of, Joel. And so, that's maybe part of the conversation with how Baltimore City is managing that right now, because I'm not sure exactly. They have an exempt list. Their process is very informal, which is another thing, is that I think the process for any type of exemption request has to be a more formalized effort, with a real application, for example, and things like that to the county. And then could it even be one that is only exempting in certain areas? I wouldn't want to suggest that you try to get it down to specific vehicles, because I think that turns into a real nightmare. But maybe part of the conversation is around an exemption in certain areas, which then would allow us to address John's concern about the cut-through traffic that he's getting from UPS, as opposed to UPS activity that might not be as significant because of where he is geographically, right from their distribution center, where we don't want to ticket. We've got multiple UPS trucks coming in our neighborhood every single day, particularly right now, and I probably am not wrong to say that it's 5 a day just in my neighborhood. So if I had a camera at that location, and those 5 guys were getting a citation every day, now multiply that every single day at every single location, it can quickly get to be very large. What I do want to be really clear about is, by exemption, we're only talking about from camera enforcement, not that travel is legal on that road, right? That's really important, because John's travel is illegal that he is experiencing, and I don't want in any way to use the word exemption saying that they'd be exempt from ticketing. I'm just trying to make sure that the rest of a large volume user doesn't get caught up if they have a lot of legal activity in residences. So, but yeah, there's got to be some manual process as part of this for sure.
talk about exemption from camera enforcement, I think that puts it in a different box, because we're not talking and separating camera enforcement versus illegal going down a road you shouldn't be going down, period, right? And I think when we offer up those alternative local routes that they can go and they're still going down a road that says no through traffic, I think that should knock a lot of them out of there. And I would think that we would put cameras in locations where, I would think, at least I would recommend that we put cameras in locations where there's other options for them to go, so that they don't have to come down this road. So that those cameras are actually catching people that are coming down roads that they don't have to come down.
Yeah, that's the intent, right? I just have this core volume of members, right, that will be on those roads at times if they're in residences, and it's the type of business that's in frequent residential activity. Yes.
And I think it goes back to the GIS information that Doug was able to present, where we actually know there's a lot going on in that area because of manufacturing. So the likelihood of it, because we also don't want to put a whole bunch of work on enforcement to just be looking at these things a whole bunch when we know there's a lot going on in that area. So I think it'll require a lot more attention.
Yeah, and I have no perspective, D'Andrea, of what Baltimore City's manual process is like from a workload standpoint. So, yeah.
Would it be beneficial for us to, Joel, get information from Baltimore as a starting point, information from Baltimore City about how they decided on their exemptions and their manual process, so we could have those pros and cons in our bailiwick before we start to have those discussions?
Yes, I think you're right, and we will go back to them then.
And that may give us a starting point to work with and things to consider. All right. Any other open discussions on those areas?
One thing I can ask you is, if you have an exemption on a camera ticket, then how are we going to enforce the through truck problem? Is it going to be physical enforcement with police officers ticketing?
That's a big question, John.
Because if you're going to exempt all the camera tickets, then there's no way to enforce it. I know the Waze, like you talked about Waze before, I think they tell on Waze where the police officers are sitting. Because I noticed that when the police are out here giving tickets, the traffic dies down really quick for about an hour.
Yeah, I don't think any solution will eliminate it altogether.
Right.
But I think if we go in with an open mind in terms of the research of what the camera options offer them alternatives and other routes that they can take.
Sure.
Do some enforcement. I think we narrow down the issues at hand. I don't think we eliminate them all together any
Right.
way, because there's always going to be people that's going to go down these routes that shouldn't go down the routes.
Sure.
Those probably be the ones that are actually get the tickets.
Right.
But I think if we narrow it down and kind of take the focus off of it so that they know we paid attention to it and we're making some recommendations, I think that's the charge.
Okay.
Yeah, to make it better in some kind of way, but I don't think we're going to eliminate it completely.
Yeah, because I have two fuel companies up the street from me that deliver fuel down this way, and UPS and a couple other enterprises up there that come down through here regular. And if you give everybody exemptions, I don't think it's going to work out real well.
I don't think it's going to work out real well either.
Okay.
I'm excited about the truck routes and adding truck routes, because I think that'll help.
Yeah, that's definitely going to help, because you give people an alternative. I think it'll help. especially on Waze or GPS or something that they can access easily.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so I think that we have, as I look at the agenda, we pretty much talked about the items that we had on the agenda. We're at the point of review of upcoming meetings. So I have a few suggestions about the upcoming meetings. I know we need to get some feedback on Baltimore City about how they built their exemption process so that we could have a starting point with that. And I also know that we need to work on the primary routes and the local trucking routes for the next meeting as well, so that we can meet that March deliverable. I keep looking at that March, December, and it's coming around the corner fairly quickly. Those suggestions I have about the upcoming meeting. I want to open it up for discussion for any other suggestions. The group. Anybody, somebody.
Well, one thing I can tell you is that everything seems to be in the right direction. But one other question that we might have to address is the signage problem, because I had Baltimore County DOT officers tell me they weren't enforcing the signage problem because it was too vague. They wanted 3/4 ton, they said wasn't identifiable, that they wanted to go 10,000 pound restrictions. And so I would think until the county would do something different on the signage, I think it's now they don't enforce it.
Yeah, that's a good
Yeah, and John brings up a standard that is universally recognized of over 10,000 pounds, right? That's the definition of a commercial motor vehicle in federal and state law. And so you know if you're running a commercial motor vehicle or not. And so I think that makes a lot of sense. One of the things maybe to explore, because I know we were sort of hung up a little bit on this exemption issue for a future meeting, is if you had a real application process that I don't believe is what Baltimore City has, then let's say that a company like UPS was going to apply for an exemption. The opportunity to apply for what I'll call a selective exemption, where you would ask them, once you know where you're going to put the cameras at, right, then could they apply for an exemption from a camera in a particular area because they can justify regular legal travel on that road, right? And so maybe it turns into sort of a limited exemption opportunity, as opposed to John's issue where they should be getting those citations and the problem probably goes away really fast. So I don't want to make it seem like I'm trying to eliminate the ability of him getting the benefit of the camera, because I think if you put one there, it goes away really fast, right? And so I think there are maybe some ways to slice and dice that issue a little bit. So.
Okay. And John, I do want to make sure that you know that the signage, evaluating the existing signage and making necessary adjustments is another item that we said we would have as a recommendation in our deliverables for March as well. I was hoping we make some movement on this part, which we really did, so that at the next meeting we could actually talk about the signage. I actually have copies of the signs and a list of where we currently have the signage, so that we can use that as a starting point to kind of help with that discussion. But yes, we do have that on the list, and that is something that we need to look at.
Okay, that's great, because like I said, the DOT officer I talked to said that they wouldn't ticket anybody for the signage because the signage was incorrect. And so I said, well, at least you could ticket the 18-wheelers and dual-wheeled rear trucks, dual rear wheel trucks. And they said, well, people that drive a 1-ton truck don't know they're driving a 1-ton truck. Well, believe me, I got a CDL license and I know what I'm driving.
Yeah, usually
you have to know what you're driving.
You got to know what you're driving.
Right. And so they said they wouldn't ticket. They said it wouldn't be fair to ticket the bigger trucks and not the smaller trucks. So they weren't ticketing anybody. That's what they did in front of my house a year ago. They were checking them for DOT violations, but they weren't ticketing anybody for coming through a marked truck, no through truck zone. So that's sort of a little futile to me, but I don't know. I'm just an old trucker. I don't know.
You know a lot. You know a lot. All right. So any other suggestions about upcoming meetings? Right, Joel, did I cover everything? Anything we want to talk about before we adjourn?
Just logistically, I think, it makes sense to keep doing this once a month, but I just want to make sure nobody has any issue with the next meeting being pretty soon after the new year, so we can keep on that sort of once a month track, because I think we'll want to have the report ready for the March meeting, which would give us 2 more ahead of it. So just want to give people a few seconds to raise objections to the first week of January meeting, if that's going to be a problem for anybody.
Not a problem for me. I'm fine
Be fine.
with the COVID. We're all sitting home anyway, so it's fine.
All right, sounds
Great.
good. We got a lot of work in front of us for the next 2 meetings. We're going to do some homework and send you out some suggestions and feedback that we're looking for. Maybe a couple more presentations so that we can meet that March deliverable. But I think we're well on our way. It's been a fruitful conversation, and I appreciate you all being willing to be a part of the task force and offer your feedback. So thank you, and I won't see you all. So have a good holiday until we see you again in January.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
All right.
Or at least until 2 o'clock, Deandra.
Oh, right.
Thank you, guys. Have a good weekend.
You too.
Alrighty. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Everybody have a great holiday.
You do the same.
Thank you.